The next morning, during my free watch, I checked the places where the strange figure had climbed aboard and left the ship, but I found nothing unusual, no sign or clue to explain what I had seen. For several days, everything stayed quiet. Still, I walked the decks at night, hoping to find something new that might explain the mystery. I didn't tell anyone what I had seen because I was sure they would just laugh. Night after night passed without answers. Then, during the middle watch, something happened. I was at the wheel, and Tammy, one of the young apprentices, was walking up and down on the lee side to keep time. The second mate stood forward, leaning over the poop, smoking. The night was clear, and the moon, though fading, still gave enough light to see clearly. 3 bells had sounded, and I was sleepy. The ship was steering easily, and I must have dozed a little. Suddenly, I thought I heard someone softly call my name. I checked the second mate still smoking and then looked at the compass. The ship was still on course, so I relaxed. Then I heard the voice again, clearly this time. I looked to the side and saw Tammy leaning over the steering gear, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I was about to ask what he wanted, but he raised his finger to signal silence and pointed forward along the lee side of the poop. In the pale light, his face looked white, and he seemed very upset. I looked in the direction he pointed but saw nothing. "What is it?" I asked quietly after a few moments of staring without seeing anything. "I can't see a thing." "Shh," he said in a hoarse whisper, not looking at me. Then suddenly he gasped and jumped across the wheel box to stand beside me, shaking. He stared hard at something I couldn't see. I was shocked by how frightened he looked and how seriously he stared into the dark. "What's wrong with you?" I asked, more firmly. Then I remembered the second mate. I looked toward him. He was still leaning at the front, back turned to us, and hadn't seen Tammy. I turned back to the boy. "For heaven's sake, get back to your side before the second sees you," I said. "If you want to say something, say it from there." "You're dreaming." But right then, Tammy grabbed my sleeve and pointed across to the log reel, screaming, "He's coming! He's coming!" At that moment, the second mate ran toward us, shouting to know what was going on. Then, under the rail near the log reel, I saw something like a man crouching. It was blurry and strange, almost not real, but it reminded me instantly of the figure I'd seen a week ago in the moonlight. The second mate reached me and I pointed, not speaking. Still, I knew, somehow, he wouldn't see it. Strange, wasn't it? Then, in an instant, it was gone. Tammy was hugging my knees. The second looked for a second longer, then turned to me with a sneer. "Asleep, both of you, I guess," he said. Without waiting for a reply, he told Tammy to get off the poop or he'd kick him. Then he went forward, lit his pipe again, and walked back and forth, sometimes giving me a look that seemed both doubtful and confused. Later, when my shift ended, I rushed to the apprentice's room. I wanted to talk to Tammy. I had many questions and wasn't sure what to do. I found him sitting on a sea chest, hugging his knees, staring at the door in fear. When I appeared, he gasped, then relaxed a little. "Come in," he said softly, trying to sound calm. I stepped in and sat across from him. "What was it?" he asked, putting his feet on the floor and leaning forward. "Please tell me what it was." His voice grew louder, and I raised my hand. "Shh," I warned. "You'll wake the others." He repeated the question more quietly. I hesitated. Maybe I should pretend nothing had happened. Maybe that was safer. So I decided quickly and said, "What do you mean? What was it?" "That's what I came to ask you. You made us both look silly with your panic up on deck." I said it in an annoyed tone. "I didn't," he whispered fiercely. "You know I didn't. You saw it too. You even pointed it out to the second mate." "I saw you." The poor kid was nearly crying, scared and upset that I pretended not to believe him. "Nonsense," I said. You were sleeping during your watch. You dreamed something and woke up suddenly. You were confused. I wanted to calm him down, though honestly I needed calming too. What if he knew about that strange thing I saw on the main deck? I wasn't asleep any more than you were, he said bitterly. And you know that. You're just joking with me. It's haunted, he repeated. Haunted? Who says that? I asked, not really believing him. You know, I do. And everyone knows it. That's just an old sailor's story. The ship isn't haunted any more than I am. It's not nonsense, he said, clearly not convinced. And it's not an old sailor's story. Why won't you say you saw it? He asked, almost crying with excitement, raising his voice again. I told him not to wake the others. Why won't you admit you saw it? He repeated. I got up from the chest and went to the door. You're a young fool, I said, and I advise you not to go talking like this on deck. Take my advice, go to bed and sleep. You're acting crazy. Tomorrow you'll see how foolish you've been. I stepped over the washboard and left him. I think he followed me to say something more, but I was already halfway forward. For the next few days, I avoided him as much as I could, making sure he never caught me alone. I wanted to convince him he was wrong about what he thought he saw that night. But soon, it became clear that it was useless. On the night of the second day, something strange happened again, which made it impossible to deny. It happened during the first watch, just after 6 bells. I was sitting forward on the forehatch. No one was on the main deck. The night was very calm and the wind had almost stopped, so the ship was very quiet. Suddenly, I heard the second mate's voice, in the main rigging. Who is going up there? I sat up and listened carefully. Then, everything became very quiet. After a moment, the second mate's voice came again. He sounded angry. Do you hear me? What are you doing up there? Come down. I stood up and walked toward the windward side. From there, I could see the break of the poop deck. The second mate was standing by the starboard ladder. He was looking up at something hidden by the topsails which I couldn't see. Then he shouted again, Damn you! Come down when I tell you. He stamped his foot and shouted harshly, but there was no answer, and I started to walk aft, confused. What was happening? Who had gone up there? Who would be foolish enough to go without permission? Suddenly, I thought about the figure Tammy and I had seen before. Had the second mate seen someone? I hurried forward, then stopped suddenly. At the same time, I heard the sharp whistle of the second mate calling the watch. I turned and ran to the forecastle to wake the men. After a minute, I was hurrying aft with them to see what was going on. His voice met us halfway. Some of you go quickly up the main mast and find out who that fool is up there. See what trouble he is causing. Why, yes, sir, several men answered. I joined them, and the others started to follow. But the second mate shouted for some to go up on the leeward side in case the man tried to escape. That way, as I followed the 2 men up the mast, I heard the second mate tell Tammy, who was keeping time, to come down to the main deck with the other apprentice and watch the fore and aft stays. He might try to escape that way if he is trapped, the second mate said. Well, the second mate asked sharply. Nothing, sir, Tammy said, and went down to the main deck. The first man going windward reached the futtock shrouds. His head was above the top, and he looked carefully before climbing higher. See anything, Jock? Asked Plummer, the man above me. No, Jock answered shortly, climbed over the top, and disappeared from my sight. The man in front of me followed. He stopped to spit, then looked down at me. What is going on? He asked. What did he see? Who are we chasing? I said I didn't know, and he climbed higher into the topmast rigging. I followed. The men on the leeward side were about level with us. Below the foot of the topsail, I could see Tammy and the other apprentice on the main deck. Looking up, The men were quietly excited, curious, and aware that something strange was happening. Looking to leeward, they stayed close together, and I felt the same. Must be a bloomin' stowaway, one of the men suggested. Maybe, but then I rejected it. I remembered how that strange figure had stepped over the rail into the sea. That couldn't be explained that way. This time I was curious and nervous. I hadn't seen anything. What could the second mate have seen? Were we chasing ghosts, or was there really someone, something real up in the shadows? My mind went back to the thing Tammy and I had seen near the log reel. I remembered how the second mate couldn't see it then. It seemed natural he shouldn't see it. The word stowaway came to me again. Maybe that would explain this. It could. Suddenly, my thoughts were broken by shouting and waving. I see him. I see him, one man shouted, pointing up over our heads. Where? I looked up as hard as I could. I felt a little relieved. It's real then, I thought. I turned my head and looked along the yards above us. Still, I could see nothing, just shadows and patches of light. Down on deck, I heard the second mate's voice. Have you got him? He shouted. Not yet, sir, the man on the lee side shouted back. We see him, sir, added Quine. I don't, I said. There he is again, Quine said, pointing up to the royal yard. That's what you are. A voice came from above. It was Jock, and the men laughed at Quine. I could see Jock now. He was standing in the rigging just below the yard. He had climbed straight up while the rest of us were still hanging at the top. You're a fool, Quine, he said again. And I think the second mate is just as soft. He started to climb down. So there's no one? I asked. No, he said briefly. When we reached the deck, the second mate ran down from the poop deck. He came towards us, looking serious. Have you got him? He asked confidently. There was no one, I said. What? He almost shouted. You're hiding something, he said angrily, looking at each of us. Or was it? We're hiding nothing, I said, for all of us. There's no one up there. The second mate looked around us. Am I a fool? He asked with contempt. No one answered. I saw him myself, he said. Tammy saw him too. He wasn't over the top when I first saw him. No mistake. Jock climbed right up to the royal yard. The second mate said nothing at first, but walked a few steps aft and looked up the main mast. Then he turned to the two apprentices. Are you two sure you didn't see anyone coming down from the main mast? He asked suspiciously. Yes, sir, they answered together. Anyway, I heard him say quietly, I would have seen him myself if he was there. Do you know who you saw, sir? I asked. He looked at me closely. Oh, no, he said. We are... He thought for a moment while we stood quietly, waiting. By the holy poker, he said suddenly. I should have thought of that before. He looked at us one by one. Are you all here? He asked. Yes, sir, we said together. He counted us carefully. All of you, stay here, he said. Tammy, go to your place and see if the others are in their bunks. Then tell me, quickly. Tammy went. The second mate turned to the other apprentice. You go forward to the forecastle, count the watch, and come back to report. The apprentice went forward. Tammy came back and told the second mate the other two apprentices were asleep in their bunks. So the second sent Tammy to check the carpenter's and sailmaker's rooms. While Tammy was gone, the other apprentice returned and said all the men were in their bunks and asleep. Yes, sir, he answered. The second mate quickly told him, Go check if the steward is in his berth. It was clear he was very confused. You've still got a lot to learn, Mr. Second mate, I thought. I wondered what he would conclude. A few seconds later, Tammy returned, saying the carpenter, sailmaker, and doctor were all in bed. The second mate muttered something and told Tammy to check the saloon to see if the first and third mates were in their rooms. Tammy started to go but then stopped. Shall I check the old man's cabin, sir, while I'm down there? Tammy asked. No, said the second mate. Do exactly what I told you, then come back and tell me. And ran up to the poop deck. While Tammy was gone, the other apprentice came up to say the steward was in his berth and wanted to know why we were messing around his part of the ship. The second mate stayed silent for almost a minute. Then he turned to us and said we could go forward. As we moved forward quietly, Tammy came down from the poop and went to the second mate. I heard him say the two mates were in their berths, asleep. Then he added, as if it just occurred to him, so is the old man. I thought I told you. The second mate began. I didn't, sir, Tammy said. His cabin door was open. The second mate started walking aft. I caught part of what he said to Tammy, accounted for the whole crew. I didn't hear the rest. I waited a moment, then hurried after the others. As we reached the forecastle, one bell rang, and we woke the other watch, telling them what had happened. I reckon he must be drunk, one man said. Not him, said another. He's been napping on the break, dreaming his mother-in-law came to visit him, kindly. They laughed, and I smiled too, although I didn't really believe it, man. Could be hell, Stubbins replied. Stowaways aren't that stupid. I don't know, said Quine. I wish I'd asked the second mate what he thought. I don't think it was a stowaway, I said. What would a stowaway want up there? I guess he'd try the steward's pantry instead. You bet he would every time, said Stubbins. He lit his pipe and smoked slowly. I still don't understand it, he added after a short silence. Neither do I said. Then I was quiet for a while, listening to the others talk about it. Soon I saw Williams, the man who had spoken about shadows. He was sitting in his bunk, smoking quietly and not joining the conversation. I went to him. What do you think about all this, Williams? I asked. Do you believe the second mate really saw something? He looked at me with a serious, suspicious look but didn't say anything. I felt a little annoyed but didn't show it. After a moment I continued, Williams, I think I understand what you meant that night when you said there were too many shadows. What do you mean? He asked, surprised, pulling his pipe from his mouth. What I said. There are too many shadows, I repeated. He sat up, leaned forward, holding out his hand and pipe. His eyes showed he was excited. Have you seen? He hesitated, then looked at me, trying to explain. Well, I asked. For about a minute he tried to speak. Then his face changed from doubt to a serious, determined look. He said, I'm damned if I don't get my pay from her, shadows or no shadows. What does that have to do with your pay? I asked. He nodded strongly. Look here, he said. I waited. The crowd cleared, he said, pointing toward the back of the ship. You mean in San Francisco? I asked. Yes, he said, and without a cent of the pay. I stayed. I suddenly understood. You think they saw shadows? I said. He nodded but said nothing. So they all left? I asked. He nodded again and tapped his pipe on the side of his bunk. And what about the officers and the skipper? I asked. Fresh ones, he said, getting out of his bunk as 8 bells struck.